welcome to Sciencera. In this video, we're going to focus on the muscular system. For today's video, the main focus will be overview of muscles tissue, microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscles, and the contraction of skeletal muscles as whole. Starting with the overview of muscles tissue. In this section, we're going to describe similarities and differences in the structure and function of three type of muscle tissues and indicate where they are found in the body. We're going to define the muscular system and explain the role of endomysium, perimysium, epimysium, tendon, and aponeurosis. Let's begin. Muscular systems and characteristic. Muscles are responsible for all type of body movement. There are three basic muscles type found in the body: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscles, and smooth muscles. Muscle cells are elongated, which means they have muscle fiber. Contraction of muscles is due to the movement of myofilament, the muscle cell equivalent of the microfilament of cytoskeleton. All muscles share some terminology. Prefix myo refers to muscle, prefix myis refers to the muscles, and prefix sacro or sarcom refers to the flesh. Skeletal muscle. Skeletal muscle fibers are attached to the skeleton, covering our bone and cartilage framework. They are large cigar-shaped multinucleated cell up to 30 centimeter in length. They are striated muscles. Fibers have stripes and voluntary muscles, which mean we have conscious control. Skeletal muscle tissue can contract rapidly and with great force, rest after the short period of time. Connective tissue wrapping of the skeletal muscles. Endomysium is the connective tissue around a single muscle fiber. Perimysium is around a fascicle or bundles of fiber. Epimysium covers the entire skeletal muscles. It blends into the connective tissue attachment. Fascia on the outside of the epimysium. Tendon is the cord-like structure. Aponeurosis is the sheath-like structure, and the site of muscle attachments are bone, cartilages, connective tissue covering. Smooth muscle is the next type of body muscle. Smooth muscles has no striation and it is involuntary, which means we don't have conscious control on the smooth muscles. Found mainly in walls of the hollow organ like tube-like visceral organs such as the stomach, urinary bladder, respiratory passage. Smooth muscles propels the substance along a pathway. Smooth muscle fiber are spindle-shaped, uninucleated, and surrounded by a scant endomysium. They are arranged in layer and most often there are two such layers, one running circularly and one running longitudinally. As the two layers alternately contract and relax, they change the size and shape of the organ, moving food through the digestive tract and emptying the bowels and bladder are examples of housekeeping activities normally handled by the smooth muscle. Smooth muscles contraction is slow and sustained. In the diagram, you can see the circular layer and the longitudinal layer of the smooth muscles. Cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscles, as the name say, only found in the one place in the body, the heart, where it forms the bulk of heart walls. The cardiac muscles is striated, uninucleated, and its control is involuntary. The cardiac cells are cushioned by small amount of endomysium and are arranged in spiral. Cardiac muscle fiber are branching cells joined by the special gap junction called intercalated disc. Cardiac muscles usually contract at a steady rate set by the heart's in-house pacemaker. However, the nervous system can also stimulate the heart to shift into high gear for the short periods of time, as when you run to catch a bus. Let's look at the summary of each muscle. Characteristics of skeletal muscles, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscles. First one is body location. Attached to the bones of the some facial muscles to skin is the skeletal muscles. Cardiac muscles are found in the walls of heart and smooth muscle mostly in walls of the hollow visceral organs. Shapes, cell shape and appearances. Skeletal muscles are single, very long, cylindrical, multinucleated cell with very obvious striation. Cardiac muscles are branching chains of cell, uninucleated striation, intercalated discs are also present. Smooth muscles are single, fusiform, uninucleated, and there are no striations in the smooth muscle. Connective tissue component. Skeletal muscles contain epimysium, perimysium, and endomysium. Cardiac muscles contain endomysium attached to the fibrous skeleton of the heart, and smooth muscles also contain endomysium. Regulation of contraction of each muscle type. Skeletal muscles are voluntary via nervous system controls. Cardiac muscles are involuntary. The heart has a pacemaker, also a nervous system control hormones. Smooth muscles are involuntary. They are also controlled by nervous system, hormones, and the chemical stretch. Speed of contraction in skeletal muscles are slow to fast. Cardiac muscles are slow, and smooth muscles contraction is very slow. Rhythmic contraction in skeletal muscles are there's no rhythmic contraction. In cardiac muscle there is rhythmic contraction, and in some smooth muscle rhythmic contraction is also present. Functions of skeletal muscle. First function is to produce movement. Skeletal muscles are responsible for our body's mobility, including all locomotions and manipulating things with your agile upper limbs. They enable us to respond quickly to changes in external environment. They also allow us to express our emotions with the silent language of smiles and frown. Next is helps to maintain posture and body position. We are rarely aware of the working of skeletal muscles that maintain body posture. They maintain an erect or seated posture even when we slouch despite the nerve ending downward pull of the gravity. They also stabilize joints. As skeletal muscle pull on the bone to cause movement, they also stabilize the joint of the skeleton. Muscles and tendon are extremely important in reinforcing and stabilizing joints that have poorly articulating surfaces such as the shoulder and knee joint. Next is generating heat. Muscle activity generate body heat as a byproduct. As ATP, adenosine triphosphate, is used to power muscle contraction, nearly three quarters of its energy escape as heat. This heat is vital in maintaining normal body temperature. Skeletal muscles account for at least 40% of the body mass, so it is the muscle type most responsible for generating heat. Additional functions of skeletal muscles. Smooth muscles form valves that regulate the passage of the substances through internal body opening, like dilate and constrict pupil of our eyes, and make up the erector pili muscles that cause our hair to stand on the ends. Skeletal muscles form the valves that are under voluntary control, and they enclose and protect the fragile internal organs. Microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscles. In this section, we're going to describe the microscopic structure of skeletal muscles and explain the role of actin and myosin containing myofilaments. Here you can see the diagram microscopic anatomy of skeletal muscles. Diagram A shows the segment of muscle fiber. Diagram B shows the myofibrils or fibrils. Fibrils, complex organelles composed of bundles of myofilament. In the end, sarcomere segments of myofilaments are present. The fiber of skeletal muscles are multinucleated. The sarcolemma is a group of oval nuclei immediately beneath the plasma membrane. Myofibrils, which practically fills the cytoplasm, push the nuclei aside. The striated appearance of the muscle fiber is achieved by alternating bright and dark bands. Bright band as I band and dark bands are the A bands. The dark A band has a lighter center section called the H zone, while the I band has a midline and a darker area called the Z disk. The M line, which run through the heart of the H zone, is made up of small protein rods that keep thick filaments together. Centromeres are chain of small contractile unit called myofibrils, structural and functional unit of the muscle. Striation in skeletal muscle fiber are caused by the myofilament within sarcomere. Within each sarcomere, there are two types of thread-like proteins, myofilament. The thick filament of myosin contained ATPase enzyme, which divide ATP to release energy for the muscle contraction. When myosin head binds the thick and thin filament together during the contraction, they generate bridges. Titin, elastic filament that go through the heart of a thick filament, attach myosin filament to the Z disc. The thin filament are made up of actin, a contractile protein, and a few regulatory proteins. The Z disc is anchored by the thin filament. Only thin filaments make up the light I band, which is made up of the section of two adjacent sarcomeres. The H zone is lighter because the thin filaments do not extend into the center of a relaxed sarcomere. Because the actin and myosin filament entirely overlap when the actin containing thin filaments slide forward one another during contraction, the H zone vanish. The sarcoplasmic reticulum (SR) is a smooth endoplasmic reticulum that is specialized. Every myofibril is surrounded by the SR's interconnected tubules and sacs. The main function of this structure is to store calcium and release it when the muscle fiber is activated. Next is skeletal muscle activity. In this section, we're going to focus on the stimulation and contraction of single skeletal muscle fiber. We're going to describe how an acting potential is initiated in a muscle cell. Properties of skeletal muscles. Muscle fibers have several special functional properties that enable them to perform their duties. The first of these is irritability, or also termed as responsiveness, which is the ability to receive and respond to the stimulus. The second is contractility. It is the ability to forcibly shorten when adequately stimulated. This property sets muscles apart from all other tissue types. Extensibility is the ability of muscle fiber to stretch, and elasticity is their ability to recoil and resume their resting length after being stretched. Four types of properties: responsiveness, contractility, extensibility, and elasticity. Next is nerve stimulus and action potential. Nerve impulse must stimulate skeletal muscle fiber for them to contract. One neuron and all the skeletal muscle fiber it activates make up a motor unit. When the axon, a long thread-like extension of a neuron, reaches the muscle, it split into several axon terminals, each of which connect to the sarcolemma of a distinct muscle cell. These neuromuscular junctions contain synaptic vesicles that are packed with a substance termed as neurotransmitter. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that stimulates skeletal muscle fiber. The synaptic cleft, the space between nerve endings and muscle fiber membranes, is filled with interstitial fluid. A motor nerve impulse may be enabled to reach the muscle in various instances. Motor neuron degrade over time in amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, commonly known as Lou Gehrig's illness, resulting in progressive paralysis. Event at a neuromuscular junction. Events are divided into six steps. Number one, nerve impulse reaches axon terminal of the motor neuron. Number two, calcium channels open and calcium enters the axon terminal. Calcium ion enters the axon terminal. Calcium ion entry causes some synaptic vesicle to release their content, the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, by exocytosis. Acetylcholine then diffuses across the synaptic cleft and binds to the receptor of sarcolemma. ACH binds and open channels that allows simultaneous passage of sodium ion into the muscle fiber and potassium ion out of the muscle fiber. More sodium ion enters than potassium ion leaves, producing a local change in the electrical condition of the membrane, also known as depolarization. This eventually leads to an action potential. On last step, the enzyme acetylcholine esterase break down acetylcholine in the synaptic cleft, thus ending the process. Comparing the action potential to a flame consuming a dry twig. The shift in membrane permeability that enables sodium ion into the cell can be compared to charring of a twig by the flame. The twig will suddenly burst into flame when the area of a twig becomes heated enough. When enough sodium ions have entered the cell and the flame will move along the twig, the action potential will be conducted along the entire length of sarcolemma. Diffusion of the potassium ion out of the cell and the action of sodium potassium pump and activate transport mechanism that returns sodium and potassium ion to their initial location are two events that return the cell to its resting state. Mechanism of muscle contraction. Myosin head attached to the binding site on the thin filament when nervous system activates muscle fiber and the sliding begin. During a contraction, each cross bridge attaches and detaches numerous times, creating tension that help drag the thin filament into sarcomere's center. During contraction, certain myosin heads are always in contact with actin, preventing the thin filament from sliding backward, and this cycle continues itself. Cell shortens by sliding past each other as this action occurs concurrently in sarcomere across the muscle fiber. Calcium ion and ATP are required to produce cross bridge when myosin head attached to the actin. Along the membranous tubules that fold inward from sarcolemma, action potential passes deep into the muscle fiber. Then, sarcoplasmic reticulum in the cell is stimulated by action potential to release calcium ion into the cytoplasm. The calcium ion cause myosin to bind to actin, causing the filament sliding. When the action potential is completed, calcium ions are returned to the SR storage area. Regulatory proteins revert to their resting shape and block myosin binding sites, and the muscle fiber relaxes and return to its original. The sliding filament theory. In a relaxed muscle fiber, the regulatory protein forming the part of actin myofilaments prevent myosin binding. When an action potential sweeps along its sarcolemma and a muscle fiber is excited, calcium ions are released from the intracellular storage area, the sac of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. The flood of calcium acts as the final trigger for the contraction because as calcium binds to the regulatory protein on actin filament, the protein undergoes a change in both their shape and their position on the thin filament. This action exposes myosin binding site on the actin to which the myosin head can attach, and the myosin head immediately begins seeking out binding site. The free myosin heads are cocked much like an oar ready to be pulled on for rowing. Myosin attachment to actin causes the myosin head to snap towards the center of sarcomere in a rowing motion. When this happens, the thin filament are slightly pulled toward the center of sarcomere. ATP provides the energy needed to release and recock each myosin head so that it is ready to attach to a binding site farther along the thin filament. Contraction of skeletal muscle as whole. The all or none law of a muscle physiology applies to the muscle fiber. The entire muscle responds to the stimuli in a graded manner. In general, graded muscular contraction can be achieved in one or two ways by varying the frequency of muscle stimulation or by varying the number of muscle fibers stimulated at the same time. Muscle reaction to the rapidly increasing stimulation. Muscle twitches can be caused by a variety of nervous issues. Nerve impulses are transmitted to the muscle at a very fast rate in most forms of a muscle activation. so fast that no trace of relaxation is visible. This is known as fused tetanus state. As a result, the effects of the subsequent contraction are summed and the muscular contraction become stronger and smoother. Muscle respond to the stronger stimuli. Tetanus causes more powerful muscular contraction, although its principal function is to induce smooth, long-lasting muscle contraction. How hard a muscle contracts is largely determined by how many of its cells are activated. The muscle contracts only modestly when only a few cells are activated. The muscle contraction is as strong as it can be when all motor units are functioning and all of the muscle fibers are activated. Providing energy for muscle contraction. Direct phosphorylation. Keratin phosphate, a high energy chemical present only in muscle fiber, is not found in other cell types. When ATP is exhausted, interaction between keratin phosphate and ADP cause a transfer of a high energy phosphate group from CP to ADP, allowing new ATP to be generated in the fraction of second. Even though muscle fibers store 5 times as much CP as ATP, the keratin phosphate resources are quickly depleted in less than about 15 seconds. Then we have aerobic pathway. At resting and during mild to moderate exercise, aerobic respiration provides 95% of the ATP required for the muscular activation. Aerobic respiration occurs in mitochondria and comprises a succession of oxygen dependent metabolic pathways. The term oxidative phosphorylation refers to all of these mechanisms. Glucose is entirely broken down into carbon dioxide and water during aerobic respiration, and some of the energy released as bonds are broken is retained in bonds of ATP molecule. Although aerobic respiration produces a lot of ATP, approximately 32 ATP per gram of glucose, it is sluggish and requires constant oxygen and nutrient fuels delivery to the muscles to keep it functioning. The last is anaerobic pathway. First step in the breakdown of glucose take place in anaerobic is glycolysis. Glucose is broken down to pyruvic acid during the glycolysis in the cytosol and modest amount of energy are trapped in ATP bonds, 2 ATP per 1 glucose molecule. To make more ATP, the pyruvic acid enters the oxygen requiring aerobic processes that occur within the mitochondria. When muscle activity is high, however, the pyruvic acid produced during glycolysis is converted to lactic acid and the process is called anaerobic glycolysis. So the pathways to provide energy for muscle contraction are direct phosphorylation, aerobic pathway and anaerobic pathway. Muscle fatigue or oxygen deficit. When a muscle is fatigued, it is unable to contract even when stimulated. The common reason for muscle fatigue is oxygen deficiency. Oxygen must be repaid to the tissue to remove oxygen depth. Oxygen is required to get rid of accumulated lactic acid. Increasing acidity from lactic acid and lack of ATP cause the muscles to contract less, causing muscle fatigue. Providing energy for muscle contraction. There are two types. Number one is isotonic contraction. They have same tone or tension. Myofilaments can slide past each other during contraction. The muscle shortens, bending the knee, lifting weight, and smiling are all the examples of isotonic contractions. Then we have isometric contraction. They have same measurement or length. Tension in the muscles increase. The muscle is unable to shorten. For example, when you push the palm of your hands together in front of you, your palm and chest muscles are contracting isometrically. Muscle tone. One aspect of skeletal muscle activity cannot be consciously controlled. Even when a muscle is voluntarily relaxed, some of its fibers are contracting, first one group and then another. These contractions are not visible, but thanks to them, the muscle remains firm, healthy, and constantly ready for action. This state of continuous partial contraction is called the muscle tone. Muscle tone is the result of different motor units which are scattered through the muscles being stimulated by the nervous system in a systematic way. If the nerve supply to the muscle is destroyed, as in an accident, the muscle is no longer stimulated in this manner and it loses tone. Soon after, it becomes flaccid or soft and flabby and it begins to atrophy, also known as waste away. This is called flaccid paralysis. Effects of exercise on muscle. Muscle weakening and atrophy are always the result of muscles inactivity due to the loss of nerve supply, immobilization, or whatever the cause. Regular exercise, on the other hand, enhances the muscular size, strength, and endurance. Aerobic exercise builds stronger, more flexible muscles that are more resistant to the exhaustion. These changes are caused at least in part by increased blood flow to the muscle, which cause individual muscle fiber to generate more mitochondria and store more oxygen. Aerobic exercise aids in synthesis of ATP at a constant pace and improve the efficiency of aerobic respiration. A professional bodybuilder bulging muscles are mostly the consequence of resistance exercise, also known as isometric exercise, which pits the muscles against an immovable object. Resistant workouts take very little time and require very little, if any, special equipment. Usually, a few minutes every other day is adequate. Muscle contract forcibly. Individual muscle fiber lengthen, producing more contractile myofilament to provide the increased muscle size and strength. In addition, the amount of connective tissue that reinforces the muscle grow. This was all for today's video. Thank you for watching. If you like my video, don't forget to subscribe for more.